we thought this can't possibly only apply to healthcare workers. Like it can't only apply to people who put on scrubs to go to work in the morning. There has to be some sort of common thread and perhaps even a universal. And that's why we just shifted our focus from inside of healthcare to everybody else. And that's where we found all the evidence that serving others is a powerful, beneficial therapy for yourself.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited about today's guest that we have here on Purpose Mindset. We were just chatting prior to hitting record here, and I couldn't be more grateful to have our guest on today. It's Dr. Stephen Trzeciak. Dr. Trzeciak is actually the co-author of this fantastic new book called Wonder Drug. He's also the co-author of a book called Compassionomics. I'm going to give Dr. Trzeciak a formal intro here. He's a physician scientist, professor, and chair of medicine at Cooper Medical School of Rowan University, and the chief of medicine at Cooper University Healthcare in Camden, New Jersey. Dr. Trzeciak is a practicing intensivist and a National Institutes of Health funded clinical researcher with more than 120 publications in the scientific literature. The subtitle here for the new book, Wonder Drug, which was released back in June of this year, is 7 scientifically proven ways that serving others is the best medicine for yourself. Dr. Trzeciak, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure.
So I just want to dive right in. There's so many different directions that we can go with the content of this book, but really kind of giving some background. One of the things that I love right out of the gate is that we're dealing with a concept that many people are familiar with, right? Whether it's compassion, serving others, giving, but most of what we know in that space is very conceptual. And one of the things that I love about what you and your partner have done is that you've brought it down into scientifically evidence-backed approaches, literature, and data to show the impact of what these concepts really offer. And so if you would just kind of start out sharing with the audience a little bit of background of where this whole thing kind of kicked off for yourself, what your personal story was that kind of introduced the need to go in this direction.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So Dr. Maz, that's Anthony Mazzarelli, MD, my colleague and co-author, we like to look at familiar things in unfamiliar ways. So, for example, our first book, Compassionomics, was all about the importance of compassion in healthcare. And now our new book, Wonder Drug, is about serving others and how that can have tangible benefits for yourself. Well, oftentimes these things are looked at through a moral or ethical lens or an emotional, sentimental lens, but we like to examine things through the lens of science. And so what my ask of your listeners or viewers for the next 40 minutes or so that we're having our conversation is to join us on a journey, if you will, or to allow your mind to just be open to the possibility that compassion and caring and serving for others matters not just in meaningful ways, but also in measurable ways. And so the way this book came about was I'm a research nerd by background, a physician scientist, and I'm also an intensivist. So that's a specialist in intensive care medicine. So I often meet people and their families on what's commonly the worst day of their life. And that's always been a very interesting job. It's been an especially interesting job over the last couple of years through the pandemic. And I wasn't in the mindset or looking for any change in the trajectory of my career. I was studying resuscitation science in the ICU. That's specifically, I was studying brain injury after cardiac arrest. And my team, we were publishing in some of the best journals and getting grants to support our work. And everything was going as planned. But then I got hit by something that I didn't see coming. and that was burnout. And when I was in the throes of burnout myself, and I should actually just explain real quick what how that's defined. So there's really three components to burnout. It's emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and the feeling that you can't make a difference. And so I was batting 3 for 3 there in burnout. And what I was told to do, or what I saw in the conventional thinking, was to get away more, to detach, pull back, and go on more nature walks by myself, or put in my earbuds and listen to my meditation app on my phone and go deeper withinward. And that just didn't compute for me, because that was just escapism in my mind. And um it was as if I was being told to just get away from my patients as much as possible and everything will be magically okay. And that just was not going to be sustainable. I thought that something fundamental had to change at the point of care. And that's when I dove into the scientific evidence that shows that compassion for others is a powerful beneficial therapy for the giver too, that it can actually be an antidote to burnout. And more human connection and the power and the relationships that flow from that can actually build resilience and resistance to burnout. We found that this is true not only for healthcare workers. In our current work in Wonder Drug, we extended that research that shows that serving others and being other focused is good for everybody everywhere.
Incredible. I think probably about 99% of the viewers and listeners today can relate, to some degree, that feeling of burnout. I think, especially over the last 2+ years, it's something that we've all gone through,
Yeah,
where we can.
I want to be crystal clear that you don't have to be a healthcare worker to feel burned out, especially after
Exactly.
2 years of a pandemic.
That's right.
The healthcare workers and healthcare in the broad sense is where most of the research on burnout has been done. So that's just where the data comes from, but it's not exclusive to healthcare workers, by no means.
For sure. No, absolutely. Well, and to that point, those three signs that you were describing, I really want to kind of dig in so that the audience can really find some sort of common ground there to recognize, like, wait a second, like maybe it's not all three. Maybe there's a portion there that they can find some sort of resolution through with this that they've been kind of wrestling with in their own life. You'd mentioned the emotional exhaustion, just mental exhaustion piece, essentially just being fatigued, right? Like just being depleted and drained of that energy that's required of you each day. I know, in it's interesting, your description, I can relate to being in healthcare when I had accomplished so many things to get to where I was with a certain level of expectation, right? And I think we really prime ourselves often, regardless of what path we're on in life or our career choices. We have this certain level of expectation that when we achieve something or when we get somewhere, or we have this, incredible accomplishment in life, we're going to have an immediate sense of fulfillment and some sort of like inner satisfaction that's accompanied with that. And so often, those achievements and those things that we're looking for can be a little disappointing. And that was really one of the catalysts in my own journey about 4.5 to 5 years ago. I'd gotten into a position, new career path, and all these different things, and found out, wait a second, why do I still feel like it's not enough? That was the big red flag for me. I thought, all these things are going well, they're going right. I should have that level of fulfillment. And that's sometimes the greatest disappointment and sense of failure that we can have, right? And to your point, it's like, you don't have to be necessarily in healthcare to experience that. I think so many people have, they worked hard to get to where they are in their career. They built their home life, they've got their family and the marriage and all the things. And then they're questioning, well, why am I feeling this way? Like, why do I feel drained, have that emotional just fatigue? And then that spills over. And the other two that you had mentioned, depersonalization, I think that's a word that may be unfamiliar, with some of the audience here. So what would you describe depersonalization as?
So depersonalization is the inability to make personal connections or having difficulty making personal connections. Essentially, what it represents is a state of being detached from other people. And certainly, depersonalization and compassion, for example, aren't opposites. But I would argue that where there is depersonalization, there can be no compassion. And what the research really shows, and this is after both of our projects in Compassionomics and in Wonder Drug, what we found is that the key to resilience is relationships. The key to resilience is relationships, not only in preventing one or reducing one's risk of developing burnout, but of rescuing somebody from burnout once they've slipped into it. And
Wow.
really, burnout is the perfect term because I picture a building that has been gutted by fire and just emptied completely, and that's that emptied feeling is really what it felt like when I was going through burnout myself.
It's being sort of void of having that purpose and meaning available, right? It's when the job
Absolutely.
suddenly becomes the 9 to 5, and like you said, being disconnected from other people. We were physically, quite literally, I mean, detached and disconnected in a way that was really unprecedented for everyone. And I think despite the conveniences that we've had with technology, you and I were just discussing this, but the ability to share and connect very quickly, via these tools, these resources that we've developed, tremendous thing. It kept, so many machines running, right, in economies and organizations. But what we've missed out on for a very long period of time now, and we're all coming back, depending on what region of the world you're in, are those nuances of interactions with the human to human connection. And, speaking on the point of compassion, I think, you've got several definitions here. And one that I had an impression of was really suffering together, right?
Mhm.
And that was something that really struck me when I had sort of learned that. It was like, well, why on earth would we want to be more compassionate if it means we're sharing suffering? Then if you really think through that, it's like when you're there, whether it's in the context of a healthcare provider or a loved one or a family member or a colleague or coworker, and you recognize that they're in a state of suffering and you're willing to become compassionate and engage with that person, it's not to the outcome that it's the suffering just is endless. It's that when we share that suffering, it actually begins to diminish when we engage in that. And there's a resolution that can now come about because it's shared. It becomes depleted. And I love, again, we mentioned this earlier, but this isn't just concept. How you pointed out to the audience, this is backed up by evidence. There's literature and data that's referenced throughout both books. So if you're not a healthcare provider, check out Wonder Drug. If you're a healthcare provider, Compassionomics is a great place to start. But if you question it, if you're doubtful about it, if you're experiencing burnout right now and you're looking for some sort of strategy to be able to move forward, these are the books. It's more than just information that you're providing. You're actually giving a manual. And this is one of the things I wanted to jump into next, was that this book, what I love that you've done, Dr. Trzeciak, is broken it up into 3 parts here. So you've got the first section being the diagnosis, right? Essentially what we were describing here with burnout. Then you've got the cure and then the prescription. And so as we're kind of marching through this, another thing I wanted to point out before we jump into the cure, this is kind of a segue for it. You mentioned, as related to a sense of purpose, it says giving increases givers' sense of meaning and purpose in life. Studies have found that people with a defined sense of purpose in life live longer and healthier lives than those with a less defined sense of purpose. And then it goes on to say, When you're doing good for others and are really great at it, you have a purpose. With purpose, passion and success will find you. And so I wanted to jump into that before we kind of continue through that journey. But this is something I've been really kind of preaching with this whole format of the show and the work that I do, is so many of us have it really backwards. We have it reversed, as if our great definition of our life purpose is something we're going to take and get for ourselves, right? That we can just have more of it, that we can cling to. And that is really where it's like trying to grab smoke. And the alternative is actually the case, where it's more about what we're willing to contribute and give outside of ourselves to ultimately serve a greater purpose, that we get more meaning. And so can you just kind of elaborate on that, where that sense of purpose can really begin to be some of that cure toward that burnout, and how you describe that when you implemented compassion in your own journey? What did that sort of look like for yourself?
Sure. So, as it relates to purpose in life, whenever somebody's described to me what their purpose in life is, they don't usually say things like snorkeling in Maui or something like that, right? Like those might be passions or pastimes or things that we do for fun, but they're not one's purpose, because when people describe to you what their purpose in life is, they almost invariably describe something, serving something or someone, something that is bigger and beyond themselves. And what the research supports is that people who have higher purpose in life, and this can actually be measured rigorously in research studies using scales to measure purpose in life. It's very reliable, reproducible methodology. Those with higher purpose in life have, on average, more longevity, a lower risk of early mortality, that there is actually a physical health benefit in terms of longevity for those that have more purpose in life. And for me, I to your point earlier about you reach a milestone and you think, well, where did my purpose go? Right. Well, well, as I mentioned, the key to resilience is relationships. And so when you're serving something or someone greater than yourself, bigger than yourself, beyond yourself, while you're in that process of serving, you also develop meaningful relationships along the way. And the research supports, not just in healthcare domain, but in the psychology domain, just broadly across all the scientific literature, that resilience comes from deepening relationships. In fact, in the Harvard Grant study from that's been going on now for more than 80 years, what researchers found is that what will be the most potent predictor of longevity into your 80s isn't some biomarker in your 50s. It's not your cholesterol, your blood sugar, your systolic blood pressure. It's none of those things. It's actually the quality of your relationships.
Wow.
And we know the converse of that is also true, that loneliness kills. The data in the public health literature shows quite clearly that chronic loneliness is associated with higher mortality risk for early death. For me, I became aware of all the data that that compassion can be a powerful, beneficial therapy for the giver too. The key then, when I realized, when I became aware of all that data, was intentionality. This isn't
Mm.
can't be a casual pursuit. So I did, I told you I'm a research nerd, so I did my N of one experiment. I was
Mm.
the one study subject in the research study, so I was the N of one, and I decided very intentionally that I was going to care more, not less. That I was going to lean in rather than detaching and pulling back or escaping. And in those efforts and through the relationships that flowed from that, that's when the fog of burnout began to lift for me. And
Mm.
I don't just mean with patients or families in the ICU, but with the nurses that I'd worked with for, at that time, like more than 15 years, my colleagues, my coworkers, even at home. And so the as we develop purpose and serve something or someone higher than ourselves, it's the relationships that flow from that that really build up resilience and resistance to burnout on a daily basis. But certainly there can be health effects. And one of, in my opinion, most important authors uh, that I've come across is Viktor Frankl,
Yeah.
who wrote, Man's Search for Meaning, and what he found in his experience going through the concentration camps, and what some of the greatest or some of the worst horrors that history has ever witnessed. What he found, he was a scientist himself, and what he found was that those people who had a higher purpose had something outside of the camps to live for, and like, or even an unfinished work. Those were the people who he observed had more resilience, and they were able, or the ones who didn't have that were the people who succumbed early on in their confinement. And it,
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite books is Man's Search for Me. I mean, it's such a great depiction because there isn't a better case study, really. I mean, of like the most um, just insidious place to for a human person to be, and to really take an examination the way that he did, to say, well, if I have a sense of purpose, if I have a sense of meaning, and I stay focused on that and I put my intention toward that, how much more can it be a factor in resilience, like you described? I think one of the things that shifted very quickly and dramatically for so many people was the question started coming up in so many people's minds: is what I'm doing actually making a difference? Does it matter? Right. And when we became disconnected and we're all working from home and all these, situationally, everything's just flipped upside down. The great resignation was like a byproduct of that, where everybody was like, gosh, I'm going in, I'm punching in numbers, putting in, the spreadsheets and working on these projects. And everybody now had it in their mind, that question, well, am I making a difference? Right. And if you don't have like a really core fundamental belief in your answer stating, yes, what I'm doing actually matters towards something else, then gosh, I think burnout's almost inevitable at that point, right? And
I agree, and I would like to. I think there's one important consideration for that, and that is, and I think you were speaking to it um, just before we started the show. Start small is the first part of the 7-step prescription that Dr. Maz and I write for readers in Wonder Drug. And again, it's evidence based that you don't need a total life upheaval. All you need is or what you need, I should say, is a personal paradigm shift. So
mm,
it's not a change of your surroundings, it's a change of how you interact with your surroundings. So you don't need to um, quit your job and sell all your worldly possessions and move to a third world country and start hauling water from a distant well. I mean,
right.
that's
You
what
can, but it's not always the best
sure
choice.
you can, but you don't need different surroundings. You need a different interaction with your surroundings. So it's like simple prism changes um, to have a personal paradigm shift, and in doing that, to look around you and the people who are already in our orbit. So people in our workplace, people in our home, people in the building where we live, around the block where we live, the people that we encounter every day. And
That's
by
right.
opening our eyes and looking for the opportunities to give and to serve those people who are already in our orbit, it can change everything. Research from the University of Toronto shows that on average, everyday people in everyday life have 9 opportunities for empathy every day. 9.
Wow. Wow.
And the reason why I think about those data often is because it forces me to ask myself the question, how many did I already miss today?
Wow.
Perhaps if I had had my eyes open and um, perhaps when I came in from into work today, as I was walking in from the garage, maybe I had my face buried in my phone rather than making eye contact and being able to identify somebody with cues that they're having a terrible day and they need help. And those are the things that make us less robotic in our daily walk, but make us more tuned in to opportunities to help and to serve others. And so,
So good. I could not agree more. I define it as practicing presence, right? And we're in we're in this busyness mode chronically now. We have endless number of notifications and messages and emails and things pouring in to grab our attention at all times, that we're very rarely sort of present in the moment right now, and where our focus is going intentionally. And like you said, I started doing this in my own life, personally and professionally, but began recognizing more of those opportunities were being revealed the more that I was willing to be present. And so, the phone is the perfect example for this, because when we get home, say from the work day, for many of us, the work doesn't necessarily end. There's still projects that need to be completed. There's still follow-ups that need to be had. And it has to become an intentional choice that if you have loved ones, a partner, a spouse, children that you are coming home to now divert your attention and your focus into recognizing, okay, what are some needs that I can serve here, right? So for me, I think about it in terms of, being a dad. There's constant needs. There's never ending needs from my children. And my purpose becomes becoming a good father when I'm with them. And I realize this also, it's not based on the quantity of time that I have with them. I may have like 4 hours to be at home in the evening. And if 3.5 of those hours I'm distracted on my phone, I'm semi stressed out, I'm trying to answer emails, whatever it is, and they get maybe 30 minutes of dad, mostly stressed, that's nothing compared to maybe we've got 1 hour and I'm willing to become present, to give them my attention, and to actually serve and to give as a father, with my purpose and intention being, hey, how can I be the best dad while I'm here? And then we have a much higher quality time. Same thing with any relationship or the work that you might be doing throughout the day. I love this because, like you mentioned in healthcare, and being an intensivist, if the audience doesn't know what that means, well, you'd mentioned it's the worst moment of their life, worst day of their life, many times, where you're looking at solutions to continue their life at this point, and the best therapies for that. When you're meeting people in a place that's dark, it's difficult, it's challenging, there's pain involved, there's emotional distress, the tendency would be, and I'm sure you experience this, I think you mentioned this in the book, is that we want to kind of guard and shield ourselves against that, rather than being truly purposeful and present in that, and embracing it and connecting with that. And it's totally counterintuitive to the way that we think. And so I love that how you just described those moments can be popping up at all times. And so many of us can be taking advantage of that, not just in terms for the benefit of the person that we're interacting with, but like you described, it's to our health benefit. We are uplifted, we are encouraged, we have a newfound source of meaning and life through that. One last thing I wanted to mention there was basically being in rehab facilities, worked in numerous ones, where I could literally see the difference, night and day difference, quality of life with someone who had retired and didn't have anything else on the agenda than kicking their feet up and drinking cocktails, versus the person that reached retirement age and was going to volunteer, was going to give their time, was going to share and connect and continue building those relationships. The very quality of life that they had it couldn't be more contrasted. But that's really the prescription that we were describing, this third point in the book here.
And the data behind it reflect real biological changes that happen in the body. So it's not magic. You don't get any magic tricks with Dr. Maz and I. You only get data. And so there are um, the benefits for yourself from serving others. It's not transactional,
Hmm.
rather it's transformational. And so it changes your experience in such a way that, for example, it activates serving others, that is, activates the reward center of the brain. It's part of the reason why it feels good to help people. There are also neurohormones, neurotransmitters that are released, endorphins, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, that all have a myriad of beneficial effects on physiology, but also are part of the reason why it feels good to help people. In addition, serving others fine tunes the nervous system. So your listeners might have heard of the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight response. And the opposite of that, the other end of the spectrum, is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest, digest, it's the chill, so to speak, part of the nervous system. And serving others tips our nervous system activation towards parasympathetic and actually the calming part of the nervous system. In addition, serving others not only buffers stress, meaning research shows that it makes people feel less stressed out in the moment, it also buffers the increased risk of mortality that comes with chronic stress. And research has borne that out as well. And lastly, serving others can actually switch off activation of genes that produce systemic inflammation, chronic systemic inflammation in the body, which is associated with many different serious problems like cardiovascular disease and cancer. And so this is not just this is definitely not a Pollyanna message. It is rooted in rigorous science. In fact, in Wonder Drug, we curated the data from over 250 original science research papers and present them to the reader so that they can make up their own mind. But there's rigorous science behind it.
Amazing. It makes it hard for anyone that's willing to really digest the content and jump into the book, which I recommend everyone do. Go pick up the book, Wonder Drug in particular. And again, if you're in healthcare, to grab Compassionomics. But if you're willing to be open and to consider the data like you described, if you have kind of this lens that you're going to evaluate things through, it makes it really hard to argue. I mean, it really does. Tell us a little bit about also after the release of Compassionomics. I think the audience can also be really compelled by hearing some of that continued story about how it was implemented because of the rigorous data and research that you all were able to dive into and kind of present to different healthcare institutions, and how that kind of had an impact.
Yeah, Dr. Maz and I have seen quite a bit of transformation here on the ground because as leaders, and I know much of the mission of your program and your work is leadership. What we've tried to do is get this message into everybody's hands. We have 8,500 employees here at Cooper University Healthcare in Camden, and we've seen a transformation because it's not our message, right? It's a message that's in the scientific literature. We just curated it for people and condensed it in a concise way that's digestible, so to speak. But we don't own the message. We just curated it for people. And in the time since then, our health system, our market research has shown that for people in our catchment area in southern New Jersey, that the two top words that people in the communities associate with Cooper is care and compassion. We did exercises with the nurses and with the physicians, and found that when we reordered and remade our core values, that compassion rose to the top. And now I'm a physician leader, so I'm chair of the Department of Medicine. I have 300 faculty and about 150 trainees that I have responsibility for. And when I'm in the room where we make decisions, my colleagues and we call each other out on our core values, and compassion is number one. And so How does a position that you're taking in leadership and a way you want our organization to go into the future, how does it relate to our three core values: compassion, inclusion, and excellence? But compassion is the first among them. And so when your core values are actually making it into your decision making, as an organization, that's when you know they're actually core values rather than just something that's on a placard that hangs on the wall. And so, um, what we found after writing Compassionomics, and it was Compassionomics not only showed the reader all the evidence that compassion is a powerful beneficial therapy for the giver too, but also that it's a powerful beneficial therapy for patients and for patient care, not just in meaningful ways like compassion is a nice to have in healthcare, but it matters in measurable ways on healthcare outcomes and the in quality indices in healthcare. And so what we did is after we received all these messages from healthcare workers that heard or read about my N of one experiment, after perusing all the evidence that compassion is a powerful beneficial therapy for the giver too, and they said that when we did our N of one experiment, we got the same results. And so what and this is what really prompted our new book, Wonder Drug, which is written for everybody everywhere, is that we we thought this can't possibly only apply to healthcare workers. Like it can't only apply to people who put on scrubs to go to work in the morning. There has to be some sort of common thread and perhaps even a universal. And that's why we just shifted our focus from inside of healthcare to everybody else. And that's where we found all the evidence that serving others is a powerful beneficial therapy for yourself.
So good. It's amazing, and it's a take home that everyone can begin to apply and take action on. And like I said, with the prescription part, the third part of the book here, you began, describing how you can start small, start with everyday opportunities. It doesn't have to be that you're, making these life-changing dramatic decisions to go and save the world and, build a school in Africa right now. The others, I want to leave some for the audience to be able to pick up the book and learn about. But being thankful, being purposeful, finding common ground, those are all really big ones. What would you give to the audience as some more practical strategies, kind of some action steps to take away if they've found some sort of interest and curiosity around how to implement more opportunities to serve in their own life? What would be some of the best next steps for them to sort of take after being able to listen or watch today's interview?
So in the chapter on being purposeful, which I think lines up with your message, is that we need to ask the right questions. And so what do I mean by that? Well, here's an example of the wrong question. You good? Good. Okay, good, right? That just shows that you can't be bothered because you really don't care what the answer is, right?
Mm.
And I will find that even in medicine, where I encounter patients on a regular basis that are going through unspeakable pain, when they're asked the question, "How are you?" they'll often say, "Well, good." And actually, that's not true at all, right? It's just become this conditioned response where the whole exchange is like totally meaningless. And what I would recommend is asking questions. And this again, we go to the data for this. It's recommended, I should say, that we ask questions that can't be answered with a yes or no, right? So, for example, hey, how can I make your day a little bit better today? Right? You can't answer that with a yes or no. And I use that even at home, right? So when I ask my wife, "How are you?" she'll say fine or good. But if I ask a question, "What can I do to make your day a little bit better?" I always get something that's actionable, right?
Mm.
And so I get a little hit of serotonin when, I on my way home, I pick up my daughter and a gallon of milk, right? And so I know those, that sounds like just little things, but if you ingrain little things in your daily habits, your daily rituals, it slowly over time becomes who you are.
Yeah.
And I'll use sort of to go back to healthcare. I want to use I want to give you an example of why I think this is so important. So there was a study from the University of Colorado which studied patients in the emergency department setting. And what they did is they recorded their chief complaint. So that's what the triage nurse at the intake for the emergency department, entered as their chief complaint, chest pain or abdominal pain or twisted ankle or whatever, right? And then what these researchers did is they asked the patients in the emergency department, what worries you the most? What worries you the most? And what they found is that there was only a 26% concordance, meaning a 74% discordance between their greatest worry and the chief complaint registered as to why they were in the ER. So, for example, a middle-aged man said, his greatest fear was losing his family because he was back in the hospital today, and he knew that it was because of the drugs. And so, really, what he was there for, yes, chest pain is what his chart said, and it made total sense, I'm sure, to do the electrocardiograms and the cardiac biomarkers in the blood and all these different things. But really, if you don't address the fact that he was actually there for addiction, you're not going to make any meaningful impact for him.
Wow.
Another patient was there for first trimester vaginal bleeding, so symptoms of a miscarriage. And she was asked, what worries you the most? And her answer, depression. And then she wrote, I don't want to go back into depression again. Having a miscarriage is so hard.
Wow.
If you don't know what's front of mind for people, and you can extrapolate this into all other sorts of walks of life, but I now routinely, when I'm talking to patients or families, and usually it's families, because in my ICU the patients are so sick they often can't, they're on a ventilator and they can't speak.
Yeah.
But I'll ask the families at the end of a conversation where I think I've answered all their questions, I'll ask one more question: what worries you the most? And I'm absolutely blown away by what is front of mind for people, that had I never asked that question in that way, I never would have known. But we also have to be, and this is important for everybody, not just ICU workers, okay? We have to not be afraid to ask the tough questions, because I know, at least earlier in my life, I was always worried that I might learn something that I can't fix, right?
Whoa, that
And
is
and
powerful. Wow.
and doctors often want to be fixers. It's just like how we're programmed and how we're trained is to fix stuff, right? But but to not resist the temptation to try to be a fixer, right? Because to your point, presence can be therapeutic in and of itself.
That's
I
right.
learned this from a retired pastor, friend of mine, who had made hospital calls throughout his entire career, and he had a very special capacity to connect with people, especially in tough times. And I asked him about it and how he was able to do that, and he said, "Don't be afraid to ask, and don't feel like you need to fix stuff, because sometimes it's therapeutic enough just to sit with people in their suffering."
Mm.
And presence, it can be therapeutic in and of itself, because what it says is, I can't change this. And he said, he was very clear about this, and I've practiced this ever since he taught me this: don't feel the need to fill this silence with speaking, right? Because oftentimes there are no words. When people are going through unspeakable pain, there are no words. But don't don't feel that you need to fill the void or the silence with words, because just being present is enough, in that it says, I can't change the circumstances, but I'm here, and
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere,
Mm.
and you will not go through this alone. And
And that
so,
sometimes, you know, that's the highest way to serve someone else. And I
yeah.
think, you know, in this community too, and the work that I do now, like you mentioned, just around servant leadership and developing servant leaders, something that's really difficult for leaders to understand, and this may be leaders in the workplace, it may be leaders in the home environment, however you might identify your role of leadership. The difficult thing for traditional leaders to really wrap their head around is how on earth could I possibly serve and become a servant and still maintain some level of confidence and authority in my role as a leader, right? Because it's very counterintuitive. It's this duality between a servant and a leader. But I love your description here, is that through asking really potent, powerful questions, what happens is we can identify the highest need of those that we're called to serve if we're willing to dig in. And maybe that means that we have
Mm.
to have a little courage on our part to go a little further and take that risk and say, hey, I might not be able to meet that need right now. But I think the misinterpretation that happens so often is that people hear serving or servant and assume that it's just passive. Well, how am I supposed to serve everybody? Right? I've got all these things and I'm not just going to get walked all over and stuff. And that's not what, you know, your work or the collection of data is describing at all, or the work that I do. It's more specific to say, to your point of saying, asking your wife, how can I help? There's a very specific need that can be met. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of time or energy, but we're out of milk. Can you pick up some milk on the way home? You can meet that need very well. You can serve in that way very well. And the more that we're willing to do that and open up in circumstances that may be uncomfortable too. And this is a, I thought of this when you were describing some of the work that you do with patients. I had a patient a couple years ago, tremendous forearm wrist pain. No one could really figure out what was going on. A couple of different diagnoses being thrown around, even the potential for surgery to reduce this pain that she's having. And I do a quick eval and kind of look at things, and I'm like, well, nothing's really, there's no red flags here. So I start to just question. I go into a line of kind of digging in, doing a little detective work here. Well, what's day-to-day lifestyle like? Find out that this young person, every day when she gets home, she plays on a handheld Nintendo, and she does it in the same position every single day, on her side, like this, laying on the couch with this arm. And I thought, okay, before we do a bunch of extensive physical therapy, home exercise programs, and all this treatment and all these things, what if you just change your position? What if you just lay down and you hold it this way? Just try that. And then we'll meet again next week. Magically, the pain's gone. The following week, no need for physical therapy, certainly no need for other interventions or surgery. But it was through simple line of questioning to say, well, there's a need here. And maybe the tool that I would have that I feel most comfortable with to fix the problem, I want to introduce, you know, well, let's get PT, let's start doing these things. Maybe that's not always the best choice, the most appropriate line of responding here. Maybe it's that there's a greater need that can be filled, and there's a simpler course of action that can be taken where I don't need to do any intervention at all. It's just helping this person kind of get out of their own way sometimes. And so,
And you saved her surgery.
saved her surgery, healthcare costs. I mean, you know, the costs. I mean, what it might mean for someone.
You know,
And
I know leadership is a focus of yours, and what you're reminding me of is that one of the most powerful lessons that I've had, um, you know, over the last 5 or so years that I've been leading my department is there are things that people don't even know about, like nobody. And what I mean by that is when you see a colleague that's struggling, um, you know, I've had people where I ask them to come by the office, and you know, maybe they feel like they're getting called to the principal's office or something like that, and I just shut the door and say, look, I just want you to know that here's what I've observed, and I've known you for a long time. It just doesn't seem like you. I just want you to know that I'm worried about you.
Hmm.
That's it. And then they can take it from there or not. My experience has been that they take it from there, and the guard goes down, and
Hmm.
then you find out unbelievable things like my home life is falling apart.
Yeah.
My in one case, and we talk about it in Wonder Drug. I one of my colleagues told me that she had a really bad diagnosis
Hmm.
and nobody knew.
Hmm.
So until I said, "Look, I'm worried about you. This is what I'm seeing," that was the first time that she told anybody. And I told her she didn't have to, of course, but I just want you to know I'm worried about you. And that was just the start of the conversation where, I couldn't, her diagnosis was something not fixable.
Hmm.
But the ways that I could help her is that, number one, I can take her call anytime that she wants to call,
Hmm.
right? I can let her know that this is a safe space that she can come in here because she one of the things that was most important to her was um, being discreet, and she just didn't. She was a private person, and she just didn't want anybody to know.
Hmm.
And I said, I can help you with that, right? And so I did for a couple of years until her um, disease had progressed to where she couldn't meet her high standards for performance, and I was able to help her exit the organization with with dignity,
With dignity.
and with confidentiality, because that was so important to her,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
And there isn't anybody, uh, including Dr. Maz, my co-author, who knows who that is, right?
Amazing.
So that is, but yet it is the most powerful um, experience that I've had as a leader.
Incredible. Um, I can hear it in your voice, sharing
Mhm.
that story too, the level of fulfillment, right? And the sense of meaning that goes much deeper than some sort of achievement or accolades, right? Like the
Yeah,
amount
totally.
of difference that you help this person experience on their journey, and you could have completely missed it, like you said. I mean, how easily could that entire situation just flown under the radar? But you were willing to put compassion in action, right? And it didn't take much to open up that line of dialogue and that line of communication.
It
You,
literally took one sentence. I just want you to know I'm worried about you. That's it. And I told her, you don't have to say anything. I just want you to know that. And then that started a relationship that to this day, not even now, and no one knows it. Like it's a really meaningful relationship.
amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I want to be respectful of your time too, Dr. Trzeciak. This has flown by. I knew it would. I knew it was going to go quick, but I hope that the audience has several kind of breakthrough aha moments, during the course of this last 45 minutes or so, that they can recognize, hey, there are those opportunities that they've probably been passing up, whether it's with the team that they're leading, their colleagues, coworkers, loved ones. Hopefully, through your sharing your story, it kind of gives them some foundation to kind of build on and be able to start taking some of those small actions. Again, it's accessible for everyone. It's not as if this wonder drug that's described here in this book is some massive investment, right? Like this is literally one of the most transformational resources that's available, literally to anyone. And through, like you said, it's through that paradigm shift where we can start just maybe approaching our communication, our dialogue, our willingness to connect, show empathy and compassion to others, how we can begin to reap those rewards and benefits. How can more people find you and follow and learn more about the work that you're doing?
You can just go to wonderdrugbook.com. And I just want to thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure.
I I would love to have you again at a later time, whether it's
Deal.
through the next book release, which I'll probably be obsessed with as well, or just a later point in time, because I really believe that you and your partner again, Dr. Maz, are bringing a tremendously valuable tool that people can begin to use in their day-to-day lives right now, and it's desperately needed. It really is. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and yeah, I look forward to connecting again. So I appreciate you very much, Dr. Trzeciak. I want to remind everybody to always serve with humility, lead with confidence, and live with purpose. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you soon.